So I'd like to welcome Senator Laura Harman, who is Labour spokesperson for further higher education, research, innovation and science and disability. Laura is going to chair the panel session. So thank you very much, Laura.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here this afternoon. Thank you so much for having me, and it's an honour to chair this next session. I think it's really important that this event is happening and that there's emphasis placed on these particular topics today. So it's great to be here, and I want to thank Michelle for the invitation to join you. As she said, I'm a senator with the Labour Party and their spokesperson on further and higher education, research, innovation and science and disability, and I'm on the Joint Oireachtas Committee on further and higher education, research, innovation and science as well. So if you ever have any topics or suggestions for me as well in terms of my work, I'd really welcome to hear from you. So I just wanted to say that as well. So without further ado, I will introduce our next session. So the title is Connecting Research Security, Academic Freedom and Research Integrity in an Open Research Environment. In terms of the session overview, so we'll explore the evolving relationship between research security, academic freedom and research integrity in the context of open research. And as the global research landscape becomes increasingly interconnected and digital, questions of security, openness and responsibility have become central to how research is conducted, shared and governed. So the discussion will consider how Ireland and its international partners can balance these priorities, maintaining an open and collaborative research system while safeguarding national interests, ethical standards and academic independence as well. So before we start, so I'll be calling our panelists up shortly. So we have Professor Padraig Carmody, MRIA from Trinity College Dublin, who is also on the ALIA Task Force on Academic Freedom and Research Security, and Professor Maura Heine, MRIA University College Dublin, and Adjunct Professor of Research Integrity. So I'll be calling on them shortly and they will be introducing themselves. But I want to start with Dr. Frank van der Hoven, who is Programme Manager of Open Science at TU Delft and Director of Research as well in the Faculty of Architecture and Built Environment. So Dr. Frank is going to give some context to the session here today. So I'd like to invite you up to the podium. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. 2 weeks ago I was in the city of Groningen for the Dutch Open Science Festival. It is great to see that there are more of these. Knowledge security. It's an urgent topic, and I would like to briefly tell about how we evolved in the Netherlands from a position to open science and having to deal with this topic. First of all, there's a specific approach in the Netherlands where universities together in UNL has always worked together and not separately in the discussions and negotiations with external parties, with large publishers. Supported by government and parliament, it is great. Having a consortium together with the Royal Library, and as such being a united front that was able to stick to its plan and not kind of waver, should we do this, should we do that, but a steady agenda and be able to move forward. That sounds very nice and beautiful, but I think that we should also be honest that there was a real good reason why to do that. Kind of bitter reality. Like most universities in the Netherlands faced an unsustainable increase in the money that we spent for journal publications. And we had a situation with data practices that were not sound, and that became, well, pretty obvious. You see here in this slide 2 images. One is this is a graph that shows the increase of expenditure into cereals, and the other graph is a screenshot from an article in Nature that reports on a massive case of fraud. The title said Dutch universities, that should be only university, the University of Tilburg, but unfortunately, a dean from a faculty decided to fake data on a massive scale, also damaging the careers of young researchers with whom he provided the data to do the research and to publish, which was a huge scandal. As a result, the policy moved towards becoming as much as independent from big publishers as possible, and to increase the trust in science. That translated into the policy on open access, and we are now in the Netherlands approaching almost 100% open access. TU Delft is at that level. Average in the Netherlands is like 98%. And at the same time, to work to improve data practices, to implement data stewards, data managers at universities, and to make sure that most of the data is open. And if you know that your data is there and it is open, you would think twice before you're going to cook your data. Well, that is the expectation. I would like to mention that in 2017, the director of the TU Delft Library, Wilma van Wezenbeek, together with a team, produced the National Plan on Open Science with a goal for 100% open access. We achieved that. The research of open data, I'm not that sure. We're currently working on rewarding recognition, important work that's going on, and it's quite a bit of stimulation and support. That's great. Then, 5 years later, we have this situation. You see here the image of Vladimir Putin, that having this council where he decides to go to war, and within 2 days we have a completely different environment in the world. Our chair of the board reported back in one of the management team's meetings that the board has together with the management team of our faculty, that he was summoned to the ministry where there was a fist-thick file of printed materials documenting the knowledge that China was searching for at TU Delft through the PhD candidates funded through the CSC program. Especially PhD candidates that came from the so-called Seven Sons universities, and those are the universities that are closely aligned with the military industry in China. And that was, of course, a big shocker to us. Before that, we felt like, oh, great. The professors were driven by the usual stimuli. They want to have more PhD candidates. They want to publish together with PhD candidates because they want to have a higher citation index. And suddenly we felt that because of that we move along with those stimuli, that we were open to be manipulated, that we were vulnerable because of that. That led to a strong response by the university, a stricter enforcement of export control, so what the government tells, what we can export and what we cannot export as knowledge or products, especially dual use technology that you can use for the good, but that you also can use for military purposes, screening of new academics, where do you come from, what have been your previous affiliations, are you linked with government institutions in countries where we think is not sound, and it is maybe not that strict, but we put really a cap on the CSC's program, and we try to hire as little as possible PhD candidates through that path. At the institute level, a program director and a team for knowledge security was instated in the same way that we have a program on open science. And to ensure that we work closely together, I made sure that the program director for knowledge security is part of my steering group. Each of the faculties has a local security coordinator, typically a contract manager. We do risk assessments. If our staff members will travel to countries like Russia or China, they cannot travel with their own gear, not travel with their own laptop, but get a clean laptop where there is no data hanging around, and if the laptop gets hacked in your hotel room or somewhere else, that there is no data lost. There is a knowledge security policy, and of course, in the intranet at the university is quite a bit of information to support the colleagues on how to deal with these issues. Now, probably you should be wondering here at this conference, like, what does that have to do with open science? And this is really a problem, because it actually tells we cannot be that open as we want. I am not that pessimistic on this topic because first, well, from my day-to-day business, I know that I can work together with my colleagues from knowledge security, but there is a strategic argumentation. You have worked now for a decade on implementing data policies, data management plans, having data stewards, data managers. And if you want to have a policy on knowledge security, how are you going to do without that? You should be happy that that work has been done already, and that goes seamlessly hand in hand to that. So I think that if we are very clear about the fact that all the things that you have worked already on, it should be very easy to work along with your colleagues working on knowledge security. And I don't mind so much that data on drones is not shared with Iran, that can improve their drones and sell them to Russia and then put into action to Ukraine. Well, that is not a goal of TU Delft. So that we keep a lid on that knowledge, that's fine with me. If Iran wants to improve climate adaptation in their cities, fine. That data we should share. But military use, well, wait a minute. So I think that the issue should be solvable, but then this is a screenshot from a video that you can find on YouTube. You see J.D. Vance, well, I don't think I have to introduce him, speaking at NetCon 2, with the title, "The Universities Are the Enemy." And I put a quote underneath that he tells during that speech is, we have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities. I advise you to just, if you have some free time, to just go to YouTube, J.D. Vance and universities, and you find this video, and I think it's pretty shocking. The result of the policy of the current American government led to a situation where researchers were scrambling to save climate data. You see here a screenshot from a website from National Security Archive, highlighting the fact that data is disappearing and how researchers are trying to get a hold on data sets and trying to save them just in time before the government puts it offline. And from an open science perspective, if we have a kind of positive, perhaps a bit naive idea like, oh, my data is open and I can always access it, we do have to understand that we do live in a world where you're suddenly faced with a government that has other ideas about it, or a government in a country next to you. We had recent elections and it looks that we're going more to the middle, luckily, but I think it's a living truth. We see it with Czech Republic, we see it with Hungary, we see it with Slovakia. We are not immune to similar ideas here in Europe. So yeah. So while UNESCO pretty, I think, optimistically stated that open science increases scientific collaboration and sharing of information to the benefits of society, I think yes, but that is true, but it should only or mainly apply to the collaboration and information contributing to the sustainable development goals, and not to the spread of weapon systems or knowledge that can be used in war. Yeah, so there is a subset of knowledge that we like to share, and there's a subset of knowledge that we think rather not. And I think as a community, the challenge is that we are able, that this data will be protected and available in the future. And I think as Europe, we should be aware that we are pretty vulnerable, that most of our cloud systems and where universities store the data is governed by US law, by US companies that can be pressured by their government, and that we have a vulnerability there. Maybe not tomorrow, but we have to look ahead how we can make sure that we are not that vulnerable, that suddenly we cannot obtain our carefully curated data. I would like to close off with, well, if we're going to discuss this topic, we should discuss, of course, knowledge safety in our relationship with specific countries, dual use, what knowledge can be used not for the human good, but for fighting wars, and what can we, according to our government, export and not. Politics, what can we expect from populist governments getting a hold on academia and our systems. Sovereignty has become a new topic, not so much like, oh, we spend too much money, but we're not in control anymore. And here we have to talk about, of course, the large publishing houses, but also about our cloud infrastructure. And sadly enough, the research integrity and the behavior of our colleagues, researchers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. van der Hoven. And I think that was really useful to set the context and to give the international perspective as well, and your experience in terms of TU Delft, and also highlighting the benefits and the vulnerabilities and the risks as well. So we'll delve more into that in the panel discussion now. So I'd like to invite our other two panelists up. So we have Professor Padraig Carmody and Professor Máire Heine as well. If you'd like to take a seat here. There's water there as well if anyone wants it. So we have some roving mics. So I might get you, might start with you, Professor Heine, if you want to introduce yourself and maybe give some initial reflections. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Máire Heine, and I'm an adjunct professor, I'm Dr. Máire Heine, in University College Dublin, working with the research culture team, Colleen and her colleagues, but I'm also the chair of the to be established, or I will be the chair of the to be established Council for Research Integrity and Ethics of ALEA, the All European Academies. And I was the chair of the working group that wrote the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, which will hopefully be revising in the next year or so, because a lot has happened. Even since 2023, a lot has happened. And I'm really glad, Franklin, that you brought to the fore the complexity of this issue. And I suppose I was trying to think about that kind of triumvirate of research integrity, academic freedom, and research security, because they really are intricately linked. You can't separate one from the other. And I suppose for me, ultimately what research integrity is about is protecting the research record. So we're talking about ensuring that whatever turns up in the research record, which is that foundation of all research that comes afterwards, is true, is rigorous, is of high quality. And I suppose if you think of research integrity in that sense, erosion of academic freedom then becomes an issue, because now we're talking about perhaps a loss of rigor, a loss of quality. And I suppose academic freedom, it's also difficult to define, because it depends on who you're talking about. So if you're talking about academic freedom in the public sector, you would hope that people would have the freedom of inquiry, the freedom to do the research with high quality. But if you're in the private sector, sharing of data may not actually be something that you can do. So does that mean you have no academic freedom? Well, of course it does mean that you have academic freedom, but in a particular context. And I suppose what academic freedom definitely is not, it's not a free-for-all to abuse the research system or colleagues. It's not a pass for lack of honesty and transparency and accountability for the research that you do. And it is certainly not a pass for unreliable research. And I think the erosion of academic freedom is also linked very much to the issues around research security, because as you erode academic freedom, perhaps through political interference, as is happening in the States, where you're being told what you can and can't research, you're also eroding trust, public trust, and the trust of your colleagues in what you do, because if they fear dishonesty, bias, that you have conflicts of interest, for example, or that you're simply not being fully open, they're going to lose trust. I think also there's a danger of shrinkage. So you're kind of shrinking the knowledge outputs of the system if you are confined to safe topics, for example. And you can create research gaps. So if you're told you cannot do research on, and we will not fund research on women's health, for example, or trans health issues, or migration, or poverty and health, those research gaps actually can have a real impact on the lives of the people who are being excluded in that instance. And I think it also reduces the pipeline. So if you can't be innovative and creative and train your students in the same way, you're actually reducing the quality and possibly even the number of researchers coming up through the pipeline. And finally, and I think this is really where academic freedom, research security, and research integrity are linked, is around the idea of collaboration. So essentially, if you have fewer or more prescribed collaborations, and you described some of those very nicely, Franklin, and a restriction in exchange of information, and maybe for good reason, but if that's in the face of research security fears that really aren't founded, then you're going to have a loss of sort of openness and sharing, and that collaboration that so many researchers depend on. And, you know, you may move to a situation of protectionism, nationalism, especially if you've got a populist government, as I say, constriction of the kind of research that can happen, and a lack of openness and a distortion of the research record, which is, again, coming back to research integrity, what it's all about at the end of the day.
Thank you very much. And now for Professor Carmody, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give your initial reflections.
Sure. So I'm Pádraig Carmody. I'm in the Geography Department at Trinity College. I've also been involved in our European University Initiative, and I was on the LERU Knowledge Security Group as well. So that's a part of my interest and background. So I think my colleagues have kind of set the scene admirably, and I don't want to repeat what they've said, but I don't know if anybody's been to the University of Coimbra. Has anybody been there? No. Well, I was there a few years ago, and what they had there was an academic prison. And I was like, this is very strange. What's this? It was so the civil authorities wouldn't be able to exercise jurisdiction on the academics and constrain what they could say or write or do. Now, apparently it was mostly drunken students who were incarcerated there, but that was how seriously they took it. And I think academic freedom is such a fundamental principle, and we have to be willing to speak out for it, defend it, and develop procedures, processes, and practices that will robustly defend it. Because once it starts to give, it can give quickly, as we've seen. So freedom and constraint are always two sides of the same coin. But we don't want to overshoot. We don't want to develop regulations which are so burdensome, so restrictive that we actually kill the thing we're trying to protect. So we have to strike that balance. But that raises issues of trade-offs. It raises issues of power. What is the reconciling agency? Who's going to make the decisions around what trade-offs are acceptable and what trade-offs are not acceptable? Maybe we can get into some of that in the discussion. So I attended the first flagship conference on knowledge security in Brussels last week. It was a very eye-opening event, and I thought I'd just give you a few kind of take-homes from that. Firstly, there's a huge amount of work, as you can see from TU Delft and many other institutions around the world being done in this area. There's decision support tools, there are databases, there are all sorts of things I didn't know about happening in this space, and many of these are open resources that we can use, okay, that are out there. Again, I'm happy to share links or talk to people afterwards if you want to find out more about that. The other thing that I took away was that Ireland is at a very kind of incipient place in terms of thinking about these things. And many countries and other institutions have much more robust developed procedures. But I was trying to look and think about what are the kind of elements of an effective system if it's going to be put in place. And I came up with a few ideas. So firstly, philosophical. What are the shared values and definitions? What are the goals of the system you want to create? And the European Council has a recommendation from last year that talks about some of those things. So again, I encourage you to look at that. In terms of principles, we need to be able to detect, deter, and mitigate risk. So those are foundational to any effective system. What kinds of coordination mechanisms do we have? Is it an open method of coordination, or is it more top-down? Do we need a whole of institution approach or a whole of society approach to this? The US has a National Science Foundation funded Secure Centre, and there's an EU version of that meant to be being set up. But I think, certainly in Ireland, we're not at that stage yet, so we need to kind of run before we can walk. And part of that might be to include knowledge security training, maybe partly embedding that in ethics processes and so on. The other thing that struck me at the conference was there was a lot of talk about crown jewels. Franklin was talking about, you know, military use, application technology, for example. I'm not personally sure, maybe I stand to be corrected, but I'm not sure we know in Ireland what our crown jewels are in terms, there's very strong intellectual property protection in institutions in Ireland, but I'm not sure that we've done a national audit and we really know what it is that we want to protect and that we want to protect from malfeasance and misuse. We need to socialize the idea of knowledge security. It's kind of anathema to academics. When you talk about security, you know, it kind of goes against the grain when we're meant to be about openness and knowledge as a public good. But we need to have these discussions, and sometimes they might be difficult discussions and jarring for us to have. We need to think about processes, systems, compliance, and culture change. And critically, we need to think about what institutions, incentives, and capabilities are required to develop a robust system which is going to be able to withstand the challenges of a rapidly changing geopolitical, geotechnical, and geoeconomic environment. And then finally, we need to monitor and evaluate to be able to learn from both successes and failures in the system in order to be able to improve and remediate on this. And I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Pádraig. So we have about 20 minutes for discussion here, and we'll have time for a few questions and observations then as well. So I have a number of questions in front of me here, so I'm going to pick out a few and maybe we'll do a bit of a rapid fire kind of response to each of them just to make sure everybody gets to come in. So look, in terms of my first question, and you've all touched on this already, but maybe you might want to expand a bit further, and I'll start with you, Frank. But in terms of Ireland, what lessons do you think that Ireland might be able to adopt from other jurisdictions in terms of balancing openness and security? And I suppose thinking about policy incentives as well in terms of funding, assessment and regulation, how can we better reflect the need for responsible openness? So I might give you all a chance to respond to that, starting with you.
Okay, that's a very broad question. I think you should be aware what the knowledge is that you have, what use it can have, and then to determine how you're going to protect and make a difference between the one and the other. What we had to do in our university to have a thorough review of what is potentially dual use. And that was a task that we have never done. We have never looked before at our research. What can that research do? What can someone else do with that? And as long as you're not aware of that, then you cannot start to implement anything with the exception that you put everything under lock. So to be aware how you will, to what extent you are supporting things like the Sustainable Development Goals, and what is the type of research that is way out of there. I think the idea of crown jewels is very interesting. I think that TU Delft, in terms of aerospace, in terms of everything that flies, control, robotics is a very important topic. We also have research into nuclear physics, which is a vulnerable subject. My own faculty is architecture. Well, that is not so much a problem, so that's okay. But yeah, each country has a specific focus on technologies, and I cannot tell you what the specifics are in Ireland. You need to do a scan of what you have and what you do, and what you can do with that. But also on your dependencies on others. The Wageningen University in the Netherlands is a university on life sciences, on agriculture, food safety. They have quite a bit of projects funded through USAID. And then suddenly, with a new government, they get these questionnaires where they have to, among others, have to report on whether or not they are implementing IDE, inclusion, diversity, and equality. And not like that's a good thing, that's a bad thing. And if you're doing that, then your funding is slashed. So we also need to look at our dependencies. Are we really getting our money from those sources that allow us that independence that you're talking about?
Thank you. I might go to you more next.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any country at the moment that has policies and processes in place that can be a model for everyone else. I think everybody's struggling to try and find a way in this, and it is extremely complicated, as Franklin says, because there are so many positive and negative linkages between research security, academic freedom, political regimes in a particular country, I suppose the appreciation of rigor and quality. So I suspect that in the end, we may in Europe need to look to the EU to develop some harmonizing, quite high-level guidelines on this, and then each country needs to look into its own soul about, what it needs to protect, but also what it doesn't need to protect. Or even if it does need to protect it, can it do it in a way that still leaves room for appropriate and helpful collaboration? Because I think that would be a disaster for science if we could no longer collaborate with anyone else.
Thank you. And Pádraig?
So I suppose there's a political economy to this, and Ireland has prospered on the basis of being open to foreign investment, to talent, to people, to ideas. Our university's lifeblood is international collaboration, international students, and so, but we're living in a changed security environment, and we want to be able to protect, or to the extent that we can, retain the benefits of openness, while also making sure that research isn't being used for nefarious purposes that will come back and bite us, essentially. That's a balance. I think, you know, getting it right will be tricky. It's part of a broader security discussion which is happening in Ireland around neutrality and all of those kinds of issues. So these are all interrelated. I was surprised at the conference, one of the participants talked about science as a battle space. And I don't think we should go down that road. But there are questions around the extent to which seemingly civilian technologies may be dual use, and also around the skills, whether the skills training that people receive can be applied to military or dual use technology as well. And those are difficult questions, but we have to, I think, address them rather than deal with the consequences later. It's better to think up front, assess what the costs, benefits, and actions required are now, rather than to have situations unfold where we find that, you know, the costs, even though they seem to be less at the moment, are actually much greater because we didn't take some basic actions now when we had the chance. I also think there's an aspect of European responsibility. Ireland has benefited hugely from its membership in the European Union. And I think there's an obligation then incumbent on us to fulfill obligations as part of that union, to be part of this conversation and to implement good practice arising from that. So it's a political process. I think the first stage is probably awareness raising. As I said, institutions need to do it. There are good, I think, some good practices out there. Australia has been very, very proactive. The Dutch and also the UK, they have research collaboration advisory teams all over the UK, where people who have concerns about potential security implications of their collaborations can go and get advice. They don't investigate individuals, they look at institutions and give advice on that basis. So, you know, do we need a national contact point? Do we need a peer learning network? You know, who's going to catalyze these kinds of things? And I guess that's part of the discussion.
Great, thanks very much. So I think that kind of brings me on to my next question. So in terms of, I suppose, looking towards the next steps and the future, like what do you think the government, you know, should be doing, you know, be it in Ireland or your home country, and what should institutions be doing, and funders in terms of looking at the next steps, and how can we ensure that smaller or under-resourced institutions aren't left behind as well, you know, as part of this process. So I might go, maybe I'll start with you more on that, if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. What should we do? I was just thinking earlier on about the responsible research and innovation model that the EU developed many moons ago, which somehow seemed to die on the vine. But that was very much about trying to ensure that as new technologies were developed, that there was, I suppose, ethics by design kind of built in, but also that there was engagement and consideration of the longer term uses, and the longer term impacts of those innovations and technologies, so that you were trying to engage the end users. Well, of course, depends on who the end users are. If it's army generals, they might not particularly want to engage with you. But I think it's, if we are aware that we need to ask questions about our research, about the potential for dual use. I mean, and I suppose a question I almost have for the rest of the panel is, if we think that something could potentially have dual use. Does that mean that we shouldn't do that research, or that we can do the research but in some way control the dissemination of the outputs, in which case we're probably impinging on academic freedom? So it's, you know, what do we do with these pieces of research, even if we do identify them? Sorry, it's more a question than an answer.
Wants to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to expand on that. What can the government do? I think universities or research institutes would be helped if the government could provide clear guidelines, be clear about what it needs, what it wants from us, and that we don't have to figure it out. Because for universities it's already difficult, because on the one hand there are national requirements, what you can and what you cannot do, and on the other hand you have your own ethics policies, and researchers have their own moral compass, things that they can do or do not want to do. Currently, within our faculty, we have staff members that start to doubt, do they want to be involved in projects that are looking into dual technologies? And they have always believed in peace, to be good, and suddenly they have an opportunity, because there's funding, to look into to research that can also have a military application. And are you happy with that? Well, that's on the level of researchers. Then a step higher, it is the support staff that need to do that, the contract manager. Some of these also feel very much uncomfortable, like, hey, what is happening? Suddenly we're moving to a completely new environment, and what is our role there to play? We had recently in the management team an announcement that our government has now made it, I'm struggling with my language. It has always been, of course, punishable by law to share state secrets. But it is now also made punishable by law to share dual technology. That is the reason why we now give our staff members specific laptops that are clean if they're going to travel, so that they can't, without knowing them or purposely, share information and expose themselves to legal consequences. Whoa. Yeah, well, who could have thought that 5 years ago? So, and this is incrementally developing, and I think that universities and the government should work here hand in hand, step with each other, so that we know how we can provide information and support to our colleagues to remain on the safe side.
Thank you. Warwick?
So it's a big question. I think generally I'm in favor of institutional autonomy and academic autonomy around these kinds of issues, but that there are support systems in place and that there is due diligence undertaken. I mean, the dual use question is an interesting one, because apparently there's a push at European level that any research that's going to be funded through Europe will be available for dual use application, not by hostile actors, but by Europe as part of the kind of rearm Europe move. That raises all sorts of other ethical issues and issues around academic freedom and autonomy and everything else. So again, that's another conversation maybe that needs to be had. But I think maybe initially, if the government can have a convening role, if it can catalyse some action, if it can facilitate discussions, maybe that's the appropriate role for government currently, as I'd see it anyway. Thanks.
Great, thanks very much. So just in terms of at the, I suppose, institutional level then, in terms of, you know, governance practice there, so how do you think that institutes and universities can manage risk and evaluate risk in international partnerships, and maybe what institutional structures are needed to support this in terms of secure openness. So if you'd maybe like to respond on that, I might start with you, Frank, if you have, and we'll open it up to the audience after this question.
Yeah, you need to have a good policy in place. I don't think it is too difficult. You need to be aware with which countries you want to work with, or with which institutes and countries you have to work with, and be specific to what fields of knowledge that applies. An institute can set up a specific team like we have on knowledge security. That works fine. Most of your colleagues will probably work with these guidelines and rules, and just like with open science, they need information and support to get there. I think it is not too difficult. We should be aware of some unexpected implications for staff among ourselves. When we started with, whoa, there was a problem with Iran. Well, we have a group of Iranian PhD candidates or postdocs, and suddenly they felt the pinch. Suddenly they were like, everyone was looking at our colleagues from Iran, like there was something fishy or wrong about it. And that is, that's awkward. That should not happen. And so there are legitimate concerns about how the Chinese government want to obtain certain knowledge, but you cannot translate that to then suddenly looking very suspiciously to all your Chinese colleagues. Yeah, and you have to find a way of dealing that, and that you see that there are individual persons and there is governments, and you cannot combine them into one.
Thanks. Patrick?
So I think the universities do have certain procedures in place, so risk officers, continuity of operations officers and things like that, and there are committees as well already in place, so we can build on them. And then it's also defining what's the appropriate division of labour between different actors. So for example, Ireland doesn't have a national intelligence service. We have a military intelligence service, but we've no national intelligence service. So there's no screening of researchers or background checks coming into the country. That's not something that should fall on the shoulders of universities. They're not equipped to do it. It shouldn't be, as Franklin was kind of intimating there, you shouldn't be screening or trying to dissuade people or whatever from coming. That's not the function of universities.
Do you Delft had to start screening? It
Oh,
didn't
really?
do in the past.
Okay. So, but the Dutch National Intelligence Agency also screens, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Okay. I thought they did, but maybe I'm wrong. So anyway, again, it's having the conversation between the universities and the governments as well, starting that discussion about who can do what effectively and how are they going to coordinate, what are the mechanisms, what are the information sharing processes that need to be put in place to enable systems to be developed and rolled out.
Thank you.
I suppose coming back to the triangle again, I mean, I must admit, I realise that research security is, I suppose, a necessary evil, a situation we find ourselves in, and that there have to be some restrictions placed on researchers. But I think we need some way of differentiating, I suppose, legitimate concerns, for example, about dual use versus politically driven restrictions because they don't like the cut of your jib or whatever. And we've seen a good bit of that in the US, unfortunately, of late, but not just the US, where people's freedom of inquiry is being hampered, not for reasons of research security, but for reasons of political expedience, let's say, but not of nice kind. So I suppose in thinking about these links between the three, we need to ensure that whatever we do fund, can fund, etc., is of really high quality and not just slop. And I suppose you know, the rise of things like AI tools, unfortunately, have led quite often to researchers delegating their thinking, their analysis, their interpretation to a black box system where they actually don't know whether it's completely true or completely valid. And certainly the systems are themselves vulnerable to bias, and that may be purposeful, it may be politically purposeful, for example. So when we talk about research security, I think we also need to think beyond the military to anything that can jeopardize really good quality and societally useful knowledge being generated. But that's very complicated.
That's great, thank you. Thanks to you all. So we have a bit of time to open it up to the audience, and then we'll come back to you for any final comments if there's anything burning that you wanted to say that you didn't get to say. So I was proposing, if people have questions or responses, that we could take them in a group of 3. So you might say, you know, your name and maybe where you're coming from. So we have a roving mic. So if you want to put your hands up and we'll get to you. Yeah, I see there's a question there. And if it's addressed to anyone in particular, you can say, or if it's just to the whole panel.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Susan Riley. I'm the director of IRL, the Irish Research E-Library. You already mentioned the term more AI, and actually it's been refreshing that we haven't mentioned AI yet today. But I wanted to ask a question about it anyway. I'm just glad I wasn't the first to bring it up. So we see researchers, you know, concerned about the use of their content by AI companies, you know, worried that it might be for nefarious purposes and seeing that potentially as infringement of their academic freedom. We know that universities and research institutions want to embrace AI, and it probably is key to our research security in that we develop our own AI systems and build capacity there. And then we have researchers who do want to embrace AI being limited maybe by policies or lack of policy, or even just lack of access to the content that they need to train data. So my question is, how do we ride this wave of AI, keeping these kind of 3 pillars of research security, academic freedom, and research integrity in mind, and how does that relate to the open research environment?
Thanks, Susan. So we might just group questions, as I say. So if we've any more questions at this point, if you want to put your hand up. Yeah, one question here.
Hi, my name is MJ, so I'm a Vice President of the National Students' Union of Ireland. And I suppose to give some background to my question, we live in an openly and more connected research environment, particularly with the advance of such initiatives as Horizon Europe. And we've seen, you know, the dawn of dual-use technology come as a direct consequence of that, where even the most basic research, whether it be in basic applied physics, photonics, can end up being ended up in drone technology that is used to kill people. So as a result of that, we have seen kind of major consequences for states who are engaging in this kind of dual use. We've seen after the outbreak of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they got severed from the Horizon Europe infrastructure. And while not similar things have happened to states such as Israel, we have seen individual kind of consequences whereby universities such as Trinity College Dublin severed comprehensively all research ties with the state of Israel. And so my question really is, how do we support institutions in identifying and minimizing dual-use exports, and what is the kind of appropriate response coming from that? And I suppose it would be mostly for Dr. Frank, but welcome to have answers from the other two as well.
Great, thank you. And we have one more question that we have time for just here. Okay.
Yeah, thanks a million for that discussion. It was brilliant, actually, a really great discussion. A bit depressing in some respects, but and I guess by depressing I mean, you look at with malign actors, they don't advertise their intentions. They actively seek to hide them. So it's difficult to detect all of this. And then I think as universities, and this came up, I think, in the discussion, what we don't want to do is over-engineer our response in terms of the due diligence processes that we put in place that really paralyze how we engage with our partners, which obviously impinges on academic freedom as well. And then there's this, and I'm speaking to people who know more about research security than I do, the whole area of dual use, very much being a Cold War construct, and especially that military angle to it, and really dual use covers everything nowadays, from economic perspectives and innovation, human rights, and so on. It's a very broad canvas. And then the point that you made, Pádraig, about Ireland being a very open economy, I think the research security community, the international research security community, views Ireland as a weak link with our open economy, and in fact we don't have a national research national security infrastructure. And then finally, this well-flagged future focus of EU framework funding moving very much into the defence space. So with all of those, I guess with all of those things in mind, the question would be, do you feel there's a real risk here that this research security agenda is going to completely overwhelm the open research agenda? It won't be a balance. It'll be one agenda completely overwhelming another. What do you feel that is a risk? And the question, I guess, would be, what could we do to counteract that? So I should have introduced myself. I'm David O'Connell. I was Director of Research from UCC.
Thanks, David. So we might come back to the panel now with the three questions. So I suppose very much in relation to the competing agenda piece that David raised, and the dual use piece again, which I know we touched on earlier, and also artificial intelligence, as Susan raised. How do we ride that wave of artificial intelligence, and how does that impact? So I'll leave it up to you to respond as you will, and if you want to add anything that you didn't get to say as well as part of this. So I'll start with you, Maura. You look eager there.
Yeah, no, well, since I was the one who brought up the dreaded AI, sorry about that. I suppose I've actually just come from a workshop where they were talking about how we can possibly integrate AI and AI tools, not just into regular research, but into scientific evidence for policy, and the policymakers then taking that up, and how you can ensure integrity in that whole very complex process. And I think that at the end of the day, what it seemed to boil down to was we needed to keep humans at the center, no matter what the tool was, that you need to have somebody eyeballing the results, eyeballing the training materials, or having an input to the training materials and the algorithms, to ensure that they aren't, inadvertently or advertently introducing bias and so on. That we proceed cautiously. These tools are amazing. They can do amazing things, but we need to proceed very cautiously, because a lot of us don't really understand. Now, having said that, you don't have to understand how a spectrometer works in order to be able to use one, but generally speaking, you'll eyeball the results to make sure that they actually make sense. So it's the same kind of concept. And some training and awareness raising would, I think, really go a long way in that. But, softly, I think is the overall, but keep the human there always.
Great. Thank you. I might go to you next, Pádraig.
So on AI, I think obviously researchers can try and assert ownership of their own intellectual property, and there are cases of that, but I think fundamentally it's a question of regulation, and there are some international initiatives about that, but I think that's a role for the Irish government to really lobby to have appropriate regulation in that space. In terms of whether the knowledge security agenda will overwhelm the open science agenda, I think we have to work to make sure that's not the case. That's not where we're at in Ireland, certainly at the moment. I'd say it's the other maybe end of the spectrum. And so that's a problem down the line maybe we have to worry about, but we have to be cognizant in the design process of that risk and to make sure that we're mitigating that effectively in whatever systems we do put in place. The dual use technology question is a very, very difficult one because Ireland is so globally integrated into these supply chains, which are run by multinational enterprises that have networks all over the world. And that has been part of our attraction as an FDI destination. So whether the government is going to regulate that, I think there's a difference between kind of technological development taking place at university level versus the things that are being produced by multinationals in Ireland and how they're being exported. But yeah, I don't have a ready answer for that one.
Thank you.
Yeah. On the topic of dual use, you referred also to the situation in Israel. Collaboration with Israel has been quite a debate on the mind of many students and colleagues. We have both Palestinian and Israeli colleagues, so they are at each other's throats from time to time. Our university has been extremely reluctant to cut ties and finally did. Other universities were first. I think it's a little bit awkward because you should look carefully with whom your collaboration is within the country, because in Israel you have universities that fully support the government and its current policies, and you have those in the opposition to that, and now you're cutting off your links with both ties. These matters can apply to more countries, but in the end, I think it all boils down to reflecting on what is the scope of your research, what is the scope of your university. I feel that many universities have grown organically and are in fields because it developed. And we should ask ourselves, why are we still in fossil fuels? What is the reason why we are there? Do we still think that there's a good reason to it? Maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. And the same with military use. Why are we doing that? And what share of our research is it? How important is it of our research portfolio? Is it going to benefit the public good, or is it creating vulnerabilities that we rather do not want to have? I think it would be good if we would be doing this as institutes, that we just reflect on our portfolio. What do we have? What is it for? How confident are we still with that? What is lacking in our portfolio? Can we work better for the public good? And what should we let loose there? If universities are already there to make such assessment, I'm slightly less positive. I don't think that that we are going to be overwhelmed by knowledge security, and maybe we should just see it as an opportunity. 3 years ago, we tried to aggressively expand the number of data stewards and data managers that we had in our organization, and financially that was not possible. I think with knowledge security, we have a perfect reason to try again. Yeah? And I rather would like to see that we think along like, where do we align and how can it help? Then we say, oh, there is a problem.
Great, thank you. Before we end, I might come back to the panel for 20 seconds each in a moment. I know someone said it was quite depressing, some of it, but obviously it is complex and there's a lot of positivity in what's happening as well. So I'm going to ask each panelist in a moment just to maybe say if there's something that you are positive about or that excites you about all of this. But before we finish, I just wanted to say thanks to you all for your questions. I think it was really insightful. I certainly learned a lot from this, and I mean, I know Maura referred to it as the triumvirate, but in terms of, research security, academic freedom, and research integrity, how they intersect, the issue of dual use, the competing agendas in terms of knowledge security and open research. And we talked about artificial intelligence as well, which is going to hugely impact on this in the future. As we know, we have an artificial intelligence committee in the Oireachtas now as well, in government, which is running for the next 2 years. I'm actually sitting on that committee as well, so it is fascinating. And we have different groups coming in talking about how AI impacts them. It would be great to hear more, I think, from some of you as part of that process as well. Maybe something to think about. So I want to thank our panel and just give them an opportunity if they want to say a quick 20-second final piece. So I'll start with you again, Maura, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I suppose I'd like to introduce the idea of responsible academic freedom, rather than just academic freedom. It's not a free-for-all. We need to be responsible in the use of our freedom. It's quite a power, but we need to do it responsibly. I think we need to keep research integrity and research integrity considerations at the core of all of this, because that's talking about the quality, the usability, etc., of the research. And I think when we talk about dual use, I know at the moment it's almost exclusively refers to military dual use, but there are other dual uses, and I think somebody mentioned the tobacco industry, for example, but also there is research that could, in the wrong hands, be used to discriminate against particular groups. So I think having that sort of responsible research and innovation approach where we have tried to have ethics by design in everything that we do will go a long way towards helping with those discussions and considerations around things like dual use.
Thank you.
Maybe just to kind of echo what Franklin said about this is an opportunity to enhance levels of trust in science and to make sure that we're doing it properly and that we can stand over the results, that we're transparent and open about the processes that we have, and that people can believe in what they're being told by scientists and academics. And so that is another kind or spin on knowledge security, that we're trying to counter this wave of disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, and we have to bolster belief in science. And this is one of the ways, I think, in which we can do that.
Thank you.
What I think is positive is it forces you to think what we do and why. And that would be great. And your comment on dual use is, of course, great, because there was once a guy that came up with CFKs for refrigerators, and we know what this did to the ozone layer. Well, if he should have considered the impact of his research and then kind of question like, maybe I should come up with a different cooling device, yeah, we would all have benefited from it. So I think that really the positive thing is, why are we doing this? Why are we in here? What is the benefit from it? Do I like it? Does my team believe in that? And what do we want to achieve? And if you are forced to really consider that, that can only be good.
Thank you so much. So I want to thank all of our panelists today, Maura, Pádraig, and Frank, for being here. What was a really insightful discussion. I think we covered a huge range of topics. I'd say we could probably talk for hours on this. So I believe it's time for a coffee break now. So thank you so much. We could get a round of applause for